everyone. As I am going further and further into my research on what the future holds, and I'm speaking to experts in different sectors, it's an absolute delight for me to have with me a very, very dear friend, somebody I've known for pretty much all my life, a Pashna Munshi, who's joining us from Philadelphia, who is an associate professor of clinical medicine, hematology, oncology at the University of Pennsylvania. Pashna, firstly, thank you so much for doing this. You don't know how much this means to me, and just now today learning about your work is going to make our friendship even more special. So firstly, thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure, Vibha. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk to you.
Terrific. So Pashna, do you want to just start by telling us a little bit more about what you do?
Yes, sure. So I am, my interest is stem cell transplant, which is essentially bone marrow transplant in the treatment of hematologic malignancies. But as the field has evolved, it's also now treating benign conditions like thalassemia, sickle cell disease. And the field has evolved to involve personalized medicine called chimeric antigen T cells or CAR T cell therapy and gene therapy. So essentially, this is what I'm involved in. And anything I say here is more out of conversation and personal opinions, does not reflect clearly the institution that I work at.
Okay, terrific. So all opinions are personal, and I'd love to hear your personal opinions on all the areas you spoke about. Okay, firstly, let's just laying the context of this conversation. As you know, the book is on the future, right? Like the future of various industries. As we have this conversation, why would people be interested in the future of stem cell transplants, gene therapy, medicine overall? Like why is this something important to keep our eyes on?
I think this is really a question that is close to my heart because, everybody sort of, when I was younger and I wanted to do medicine, everyone kind of said, oh, you have to burn the midnight oil. And are you sure you want to do it? And medicine's more for men. And that time I wanted to be a surgeon. And it's clearly, it's certainly male dominated even till today. And so over the course of, years, you sort of come across a determined path and, you have a dedicated path. And so anybody who wants to do medicine certainly has to start from there. They have to really want to go through med school and go through all the ABCs and the steps of getting there. But I think what is really charming about cell therapy right now is I think it's changing the way in which we treat diseases. And what I mean by that is how we treat not just cancer, but how we are thinking about diseases on a large scale, where we are championing the patient's own immune system, targeting certain problems that they're facing and what cancers they're having or other mutations that are causing diseases. So I think this field is rapidly and exponentially sort of evolving over the course of even my career in the past 10 years. So, and I think anybody who's interested in this, the sky's the limit, not just from a practical clinician sense of view, but then there is so much involved in terms of technology and research that people can get involved in.
Okay, so let's stay on what you spoke about in terms of the evolution of the field. Can you talk us through how it's evolved? Like what was going on, let's say 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and how did it go from being cancer specific to now more broadly curing for many other diseases? What's that evolution been like?
Yeah, I think, for decades, researchers have really tried to understand the human genome, which means people's own DNA and what they're made about. And stem cell research involves understanding immunology and what the patient's immune system is made up of and why it's broken down and why cancers happen or why diseases happen. And it's been remarkable to see the history of medicine and how trying to find a specific virus that really transfects an immune cell called a T cell, and then to change the repertoire of that T cell to function not as a T cell, but function as a different kind of cell that targets a specific and recognizes a specific antigen. So it binds to it and then causes this reaction where it destroys cancer, has taken years in evolution, and scientists have done a lot of groundwork in this. Now we're seeing the fruits of their labor decades later, because this requires billions of dollars. It requires significant involvement from the FDA and other regulatory authorities. There are many things that don't work. You have to find the right gene, or you have to find the right place to insert a target. So these were all things that took a long time to come to fruition. And even for stem cell transplant, where we're essentially taking a younger, healthier immune system and transplanting that person donor stem cells into a patient with cancer, we are essentially changing the entire immune system. And then that took time to understand how to do it safely without causing an increased risk of death. So things are still evolving and we're still learning more. But I think the science has allowed us to do this because we have technology that now can sequence the entire genome, 200 genes of a disease. We can understand specific mutations to really know where there are drugs available. Can we target those mutations? And pharmaceutical companies have a race and challenge on different cancers on how to have actionable items where they can really target these cancers. So I think that's where things are really moving.
Okay. Since you touched upon technology, if we could go deeper into technology, what has changed from a technology perspective? Most industries, they talk about AI coming in and, sort of lots of data coming in, and then the data is sort of processed and, changes. But I don't know if this is really relevant to your field. So in your specific area, how has tech played a role?
No, I mean, I think it's really, you have to look at it in multifold. So if you are treating a patient, either you're doing it on clinical research or you're doing it in standard of care therapy. Either whatever you do requires technology. It requires technology to diagnose what's going on. You require technology to have the ability to capture the data and put that data in a storehouse so you can then analyze that data. And all this can happen on a global scale. This happens on a very large scale, not just across America, but across the country, where we really try to gather data on immune therapy, transplants, and how we cure cancer in patients. And imagine the scope of this data as how this is captured. And this is captured through something called the CIBMTR, or the Center of Investigation for Blood and Marrow Transplant Registries. And this is a large data storehouse. It's a registry database that has over 500 centers across the world that really pull in all the transplants that have happened, all the CAR-T therapies that have happened in their institutions, and then allowing us to do research looking back and sort of retrospectively doing research. So that is one aspect of technology. The second aspect is doing prospective research. You have an idea, or pharma companies has an idea and they want to do research, and you have clinical trials set up at your institution. It's a Herculean task to do that because you have to set up regulatory processes. Each of this requires databases in capturing all that information. And not all the databases talk to one another. So the technology is so different institution per institution. So there's a lot involvement there that we're still trying to understand and get the right technology out there for clinicians to use, for data managers to use, for research nurses to use, for pharma companies to talk with one another. And then the third aspect of this is also, ultimately, can you have a mathematical model that can guide you to how you want to treat your patient? How do you want to not only diagnose, but can you predict what is going to happen to them in the future with the treatments you've given them? Can you predict side effects of the therapy? And so there are researchers that have gone to databases for insurance companies, for example, in the United States, for Medicare purposes and CMS purposes. This is where insurance is covered for people who are 65 years and older. It's one of the largest registries here. And people can tap into insurance companies' databases and health information systems to see, can they use predictable models to see, can we predict who's going to respond to a treatment or therapies like that. So I think, an artificial intelligence now is even gone further. So there's so many avenues in which this can be used. And I think this is going to be a field unto itself in the future. I think it's going to become its own branch of science embedded in medicine.
Okay, great, terrific. Okay, I'm gonna come back to the regulatory and ethical aspects of technology, the way you've explained it. Any other factors that come to mind when you're talking about the interplay of the future? Other people have spoken about sustainability, diversity. Anything else other than technology?
Yeah, I think the biggest aspect of all this is accountability, like who's in charge of all this information, right? Is it the government? Is it a private company? Is it the institution? Is it the investigator? And I think that's where the ethical aspects of medicine come in, which is like a biggest challenge, because patients really don't, they're sick, they're ailing, they're looking for something to cure them, and they trust you, they trust your expertise, and that's why they're coming to the physician to talk to them. And so they're guided by the physician, but the physician is only also guided by what he or she knows in their limited sense of where all this data is going and who really holds this information. What that means is, in today's day and age, we are getting smarter in diagnosing cancer earlier. So it may look like patients are getting more cancer in today's day and age than they did before, but that's not the case. It's just that we have the tools, to diagnose it sooner. And because we can diagnose it sooner, we treat it, but we also have now better tools to know when it's relapsing or when cancer is coming back. And this is called liquid biopsy. So all we can do is, take a little bit of blood sample and look at circulating DNA from the tumor cells. And that's how technology and science has gone so much further, that we can literally find early molecular relapse before the patient actually relapses. And so in order to do that, a lot of institutions, a lot of researchers now do something called biobanking, where they take blood and tissue samples from these patients. And it may not just be in cancer, it may be in many other walks of and fields of medicine. And so their tissue is stored for decades on end. And then research is constantly done on these tissues, and data, and the database grows and grows. And the patient may succumb to their illness or die from natural causes, but their tissue is still alive and it's still being investigated on. And so that becomes, again, an ethical question of who holds that information and what you're going to do with it. Or if that person is alive and you find another gene that's mutated, unrelated to their cancer, will you tell them? Will you disclose it? Does it cause anxiety to have all that information? So I think that's where the dilemma is, the ethical challenges are, because when you disclose that information, do the insurance companies find out? Does the employer find out? Will they not get a home mortgage, if they find out that they've got some medical condition that could lead to a medical disorder in the future? So all these things become a bit of violation in terms of their information. And so there are a lot of policies that people are trying to put in place to protect the patient.
So what is the current lay of the land? What happens when someone checks into a hospital? Who has this data at this current point of time?
So I think every hospital is different. And so also depends on the type of research you're doing. And so, but for stem cell transplant, everybody signs a consent. And that's the big thing, where you have to talk to your patient. You have to protect them by allowing them to know all the information that that you're going to, take from them. And so as long as you are able to do that, you sign consent, then they can give you whatever they need with that informed consent. So that's pretty much the lay of the land in general, so to speak. But there are a lot of nuances to a lot of this.
Okay. Yeah. And currently you sign a consent form and the information is then being shared as you said, across those 500 different centers. So right
Yes,
now,
it's shared. It's actually shared in just a database, not
okay,
500 centers feed into that
paying into
database.
that database. Okay,
Yes, but then, and so again, the patients are signing a consent allowing us to do that.
fair enough.
Yes.
And how much are doctors actually leaning in on that database? Are do you see practitioners leaning into this database, or is it something that's still nascent, early stage, where you'd say, look, not enough data, like I wouldn't go to this?
Actually, it's one of the biggest tools we have to know how to do outcomes research on our transplant patients and transplant outcomes. Registry database information is used in the United States. It's used through the European nations. And that's how research is done in a lot of the transplant aspects and avenues over the decades. It's not an ideal form of research, because research is always best when it's a prospective trial, meaning you enroll patients at the timeline that allows you to move forward along their course of enrollment and see how the treatment you give them in the future, how it impacts them. Here, we're looking at, treatments that are already given to them, and then we go back to see and pool these patients together and kind of see how everyone did. So it's a different form of research, but it's certainly a very valid form of research, especially when you have diseases that are, rare and they're not well represented, because leukemia in itself is just 2% of all the blood cancers, all the malignancies. And so even though I specialize in it and I see a lot of leukemia, it's really a rare disease. And so we really rely on registry database to try and see how did 1,000 patients do? How did, 500 patients do? So I think that's what we use it for.
Okay, so you do rely on it. Okay, because I was speaking to someone from the health tech space, and they were talking, they do more like devices, and she spoke about, medicine becoming excessively personalized, wherein she said that, you can't use a large sample size because each human being is different, the genetic makeup is different, the DNA is different, the way medicine reacts on me is different from the way it reacts on you. So on one end, the dialogue is like, oh, it's all so personalized, and on the other end, you're telling me that you're able to extract from a sort of largish
Sure.
space. So how does that contradiction play
How do
out?
you sort of make it all work out? I mean, I think the ultimate goal is, can we personalize medicine to each individual? And it's an ideal goal, but the answer is no, for that reason, because the Apple Watch you have is different from another maker's digital watch that somebody else may choose to buy in the market. So the way I monitor and do personalized medicine with the tools I have is different from somebody in Texas, for example. And so until everything is standardized, you can't look at the data under one lens. And so it's always going to be skewed. And this is what we have even in our registry databases, where your registry is as good as the information you put in it and what you're querying, right? So how you build your database, and that's where your IT folks come in question, and how we think about what are we looking at and what are we going to capture and what questions are we asking. So that's the starting point. If you ask too many questions, you're going to have missing variables, and you're not going to have data points that you're capturing, because people don't have that information. You would like to, but we just don't have it. And so we got to start at a scalable point. And then you can sort of tear down to see what else can we finesse here. So for example, more and more research is done where we want the patient's own opinions represented in their health outcomes. For example, we don't want the physician just to tell them, this is what's happening and this is what we think you should do. We want the patient to tell us, how do you think you're faring? Are you sleeping well enough? Are you eating well enough? Do you have fatigue? And this is called patient-reported outcomes. It's called PROs. And this is where the research is heading as well. So now we're capturing not only clinically what's happening with the patient, but also socially and psychologically what is happening with the patient in terms of these questionnaires. And so how do you standardize these PROs, right? I may write a different questionnaire and another institution may write a different questionnaire. So this is where you have communities of transplant physicians. I'm saying transplant because that's my field, but it could be cardiologists, it could be neurologists. And they all come together as societies. And you have experts that come together and either write a white paper or they have expert opinions and they say these are the guidelines. So these are how we practice medicine, where we try to sort of all come together and approach this together as form of guidelines. And this is where we're moving towards, right? So my interest is really outcomes in older people and how do I make transplants safer for older people? And there are no specific guidelines of how do you measure somebody's frailty before you give them a treatment. Chronological age versus physiological age is very different. Somebody who is 65 may tolerate one treatment, while somebody who's 65 may not tolerate the same treatment the same. And so, again, there are nuances to all of this. And we're trying to scale it. We're trying to understand how to make it better. And I think it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of resources, and it's going to take everybody's heads working together as one.
Okay, and obviously it's prone to error, right? There's error. One doctor could be entering the data. Now you're saying that it's they're taking patient feedback, which is so it could be so biased, right? Like depending on my mood that day, depending on my cup of coffee, I might report that I'm feeling a certain way, and then you're going to put that in the data. Then some doc sitting in Texas is going to take your data. So
absolutely. So you have all the points where the gaps still need to be filled. And AI is really moving very fast. And so how do we sort of champion AI into all of this? Do we have the money to do this? Or, I may as an individual want to do research, but where do I have where's my money coming from? So I have to write a grant. I have to apply for money. I have to get funding. All of this costs money. All of this costs time and effort. Yeah.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about regulation now that you brought it up many times in your dialogue? How is all of this regulated? Is this regulated at a central level? Is it regulated at a state level? How much government intervention is there? Is it very highly regulated? Are the hospitals regulating this? Like, at what all levels is the regulation happening, and how do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, I think anytime you do research, there are two arms. You have the research arm, which is heavily regulated now because of lots of past examples that were unethical in the working of research. In the 1930s, there was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment where these African Americans with syphilis were not given care, and they were just allowed for that syphilis to progress through the natural history of syphilis, just to study what happens to patients with advanced syphilis. So it became a big ethical challenge. You can't do that to patients. You can't do that, when you see that something is wrong, you need to immediately step in and help the patient. So a lot of things were set into place called institutional review boards. These are called IRBs. Every time you do a research, every institution has an IRB, no matter in which country you are. You have to get permission through the IRB. That's one aspect, that's just one part of it. The second part is you have a clinical scientific review board where they have to vet your research idea. Is it feasible? Has it been done before? Can it be done? So the science has to meet with the social aspects of your research. And then every time you do the study, there is significant regulatory requirements, even from the FDA, which is the government here in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, for all ethical aspects of the research because of patient safety. So anytime you do research, you either want to see, depending on the phase of the research or what time point that research is the drug. Is it a new drug? Is it an orphan drug? Is it first in human study? So that's heavily regulated because you're really looking for safety. The next phase of the research is now you know what drug you have, you know what dose you have. Now you're looking for efficacy. So is it working in your patients? And then you need a larger number of patients to show that's happening. And then there is confirmatory research on phase 3 scales, which are much larger scales. So all this is very heavily regulated by the institution because they need to also report to the FDA and then also regulated by the FDA. So things definitely go through the right processes now.
Okay. And where do you see this evolving? Do you think this is going to get more and more regulated? And how are they going to, with more data streaming through, right? Right now, the data is still limited as from what you've explained, but it's going to explode, right? With more and more use of technology. You're suddenly going to have a lot of data. How are they going to monitor this stuff? How is it going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, in the past, I would say 6 years, something called CAR-T therapy is now available as standard treatment to cure lymphomas and myelomas. What that means, this is like gene therapy. This is immunotherapy where you're actually, as I mentioned previously, taking genetically engineering a person's human cell, a T cell. You're genetically engineering it in the lab using a virus vector. And so that virus is alive, but it's attenuated. So it doesn't, people use a lentivirus or they use an HIV virus. So the person can't technically get HIV, but you're still using a live HIV virus to transfect that human cell. And then you're growing those human cells in the lab exponentially, and then you're transfusing it back into that patient, hoping that those immune cells go and they expand and then they go and target the cancer. So this is a very superior form of targeted immunotherapy, so to speak. And this is heavily regulated because you don't know what those long-term effects are for that virus vector in the body. And you don't know what is changing in the human body over time. So to give you an example, the FDA recently had a report that just came out saying that all these patients who've had CAR-T therapy are now developing a second form of cancer called T-cell cancers. And so this is new information. Everybody had to pause, everybody had to go back and review what's happening to their patients. And certainly more and more cases came up saying, yes, now we had 6 cases here who developed T-cell malignancies. And somebody else said, yeah, we have 5 here. So, this is all new evolving information. It's going to be regulated, even though they're commercially approved, it's still regulated because it's still, new, and it's still evolving the things that and this is how medicine works, because you have something that can cure someone right now. Do you ethically not want to do that just because you don't know what the long-term risks are? So these are all big ethical questions, right?
Oh, wow, very interesting. Oh my God. But it sounds, from what you're explaining, it sounds highly regulated, but it sounds still very collaborative in many ways, right? It seems like, at least from the outside, that people are actually sharing because there's some sort of interdependency from one doctor to another, one institution to another as well.
So it's actually mandated. This collaboration is mandated.
Okay.
There are significant regulatory requirements where we all have to, anybody who's treating somebody with this kind of therapy has to go through specific training, and every institution has to capture that training that this individuals have done, and then we have to submit it that we've met quality assurance for the program. And so, again, speaking to global registries, global databases, all this is captured so that we can all together feed that information to the government, saying this is what's happening, right? So as you're right, the more we do it together, the faster and easier it is. Now, I never even touched upon the ethical aspect of how can we make this available to everybody.
Let's talk about that. Okay,
somebody who's sitting in rural America cannot travel and come to the University of Pennsylvania, where a clinical trial is going on with groundbreaking research for CAR-T therapy, which is really the hot seat of where this actually all started and happened, decades ago. And so how do we make it feasible to all? That's one question. Even how do we make it feasible to the common man that's living in this urban city, because each of this is costs $1 million, and insurance companies, yes, they have to pay for when the time is right to pay, but they are also driven by their challenges of having a set margin. So this again becomes a government policy change where, again, societies have to come together, and it's taking years and years to allow us to say, give us better coverage for people who are 65 years and older, so we can treat older patients with this as well. Because the coverage in the United States for older patients is run by Medicare and Medicaid services for people who don't have proper insurance. And so that becomes a limit, again, to how do you give state-of-the-art treatments to the
And
masses.
access. Okay. And of course, the funding angle on the research itself, right? I'm assuming again it comes from, it's funded at the state level or at the central level. And that must again be a big lobbying every year to say, okay, we need so much money for clinical research, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so there's another,
Yes.
so lots of regulatory layers in this profession. It seems so far removed from everything, saying I'm just helping patients, but it seems it's quite laden with lots of regulation for good or for bad, which is a discussion for another time. Okay, now with all this change happening, what's happening to careers? How are you seeing? You've been in this field for a long time. You've seen it since the 90s. How are you seeing it evolve? Are there careers in medicine that you were like, hey, these things didn't even exist when I was exploring medicine? And if you had to just put on a sci-fi hat, what kind of new careers do you see coming in the next 10 or 15 years, with all this advent of tech and AI and regulatory databases, all of this, what all is going to explode from a career
Yeah,
standpoint?
I'm glad you brought that up, because honestly, when I think back, when we were in school and I was so naive and saying, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a doctor, and that's all you kind of go with,
Yeah.
thinking of that grand idea in your head, and you say, oh, okay, I'll go through medical school. But over here, students are very sophisticated. And people who are now 20 years younger than me, who are coming up in the field, they're so sophisticated that and smart that even when they're in school, they find ways to learn more about their vocation or they have so many things that they can do, that it's a carte blanche and it's a big canvas, and they're all trying to paint their canvas from really earlier on, and they're becoming very selective in what they want to do. And in my field, it's becoming harder and harder to lure candidates in to want to do stem cell transplant, because why should they toil and sweat when they can potentially work in technology or work in finance and sometimes work from home. And I think the pandemic has really changed a lot in the work environment, where people are demanding more work-life balance environments. They certainly don't see that it's economically feasible to drive into work, to pay for
Sure.
parking, to do all of that when they can easily work from home. It's a tax benefit where you can have your own home office set up at home. And they don't feel like they need to have that sort of personal
But
interaction.
do you see that happening in your field? Like, is there any way to like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even in medicine, I mean, the patients know that the doctors can see them through telemedicine.
mm,
And a lot of times, it's helpful for patients who live far and who can't travel in, but to use it as a substitute that takes away the patient physician connection, sometimes I think that's very, it's on the line,
mm,
and it's very fragile.
mm,
So that balance, I think, is shifting a lot. And the younger generation really want quick answers. I think they have a lot of opportunities now where the scope of their interests is spectacular, because you're developing technology. You can mix it with medicine, you can mix it with research. You can do MD, PhD degrees, and then people want to do MBAs after that. People then shift their curriculums and want to do law. I mean, and then you go back and think, is it necessary to even have all this college education?
yeah.
And most of the people I talk to now, when they hire new people coming in the workforce, the college degree is going further and further in the background,
Mm,
where they're now looking at vocation and are you bringing the skill set we need? How are your interpersonal communication skills?
mm,
How is your world's global skills? Do you understand what's going on in the world, and can you relate to it?
mm.
Soft skills, things that are not taught, which I think are so important in your day to day. I think that's where the shift is.
I want to stay on the workspace before we move on to skills, and then we start tapering down. When you're speaking about the workspace, of course, there are lots of people wanting work from home, lots of jobs that very conveniently allow for it. In the field of medicine, what do you think what is the workspace going to look like in 10 or 15 years? Is this whole telemedicine rage going to really sort of amp up? And are you going to really see robots in the operation theaters? And are they going to displace? I ask these questions to educators also. Are you going to see robots taking over the role of teachers? Do you really see that happening? I mean, I've had conversations with people with both ends of the spectrum, and when they talk, they speak so convincingly. I'm like, oh man, wow, I might actually have a robot doing my surgery. So where do
Yeah.
you stand on this spectrum?
I think there's going to be a lot of mixing. I think it's going to be not one versus the other. I think it's going to be in tandem.
Mhm.
That's my personal belief, and I don't want to go far as saying robots, but certainly in terms of think about surgical interventions, where the workload is increasing, and the surgical skill is becoming even more less and less, where if you don't have that many people coming as surgeons, you have to teach the skills to somebody else. You have to find ways in which to meet the demands. And so certainly I would say, yes, there will be artificial intelligence strong enough where it could replace human hands, or you could teach it the way human hands are taught, just to do simple skill sets. Right. And then I'm sure it could advance to even more rapid technologies. But certainly, I think I can conceive of it. I don't see why not. We have cars now that drive themselves. So I think it's certainly doable.
Okay.
But again, that will become your ethical challenge on how you're doing it to human life. And the ethics of it will be a whole different chapter. In the workplace, I certainly do see workforce changing. I certainly do see that if you don't allow a certain leniency to allow people to work from home, it's become the work culture now,
Mhm.
where you do have to allow your staff to be 2 days a week at least work from home, to allow them to have that benefit. The challenge is then you miss the team camaraderie,
Sure.
you sort of miss a bit of that, and how to make it all fit. That
Sure. Okay, but
becomes,
you think it's going to evolve in keeping with the
I
next
definitely
generation?
think it's going to evolve. Yeah.
Okay, okay, great. Okay, and let's go back to skills because that's what you were touching upon when I took you back to the workspace. So let's stay on skills. As and you went through medical school, you know how rigorous it is. And from everything I've heard from you and other friends who went through medical school, it seemed very medicine oriented, right? And you guys specialized in this, and you took so many courses, and you went deeper and deeper into medicine. But it almost seemed like you were so deep, and then there was, of course, I'm sure within medicine there was a lot of breadth, but it was largely restricted to medicine. And now when I have conversations, another doctor I interviewed said, oh, medical school should have curriculum on diversity. It should have even curriculum on climate change. And I was like, wait, where does this fit in? This is not a conventional medical school curriculum. Why climate change in med school? So do you think the curriculum needs an overhaul? And what would you want to teach in at med school to sort of keep up with what's coming in the future?
Yeah, I mean, these are amazing points. I think it's really intelligent to have somebody not just focus on what's going on in the human body, but how aspects of the environment affect human body and human relationships that affect your outcomes of treatment, right? So one aspect of my research is I looked at not just patients, but I looked at patients and their caregivers as that patient going through the treatment I'm giving them, and what is the impact in the interrelationship that that patient is having with the caregiver, and how is it affecting their outcomes. And what I saw is that it was so interdependent that one person's anxiety fed the other, and it really impacts what you do in medicine, right? So if you think about it like that, then you can think about how the world and how the environment really shapes us and how we practice medicine. Somebody who does not have the infrastructure and the family support is not going to come forward to take care of their health. And so you have to think about society at large. You have to think about what can I do to help not this patient's cancer, but really help this patient to come and get the treatment they deserve. And that would mean involving their church, or are they spiritual people? Can I call in the pastor?
Mm.
And that's just starting small. But if you think about global medicine, that's environmental change. And then how is that affecting, the soil, the food we eat? Everybody's thinking organic. Everybody's thinking now microbiome, right? The gut health is becoming huge in all aspects of healthcare and treatment, and what we're doing to our gut bacteria. And that starts from a baby. That starts from birth. And so again, it all boils down to what's going on in the world and how war affects supply and demand, and can people who are involved in politics, there are a lot of physician friends, and I'm not one of them, but they're really involved in policy change. And you need people like that to have a voice. And I think it has to start early on to have that mind process, to not think just myopic view, but to have this really large, grand view of what's happening in the world.
So it introduced some humanities related courses on, I don't know, the environment, something on geography, something on sustainability, something on ethics.
And you mentioned diversity, inclusion. This has become a big challenge because even in my field, and I'll give you an example for stem cell transplant. When I'm taking somebody to transplant, I'm looking for a donor. And when I'm looking for a donor, if I don't have a related donor, if there's no brother, sister, sibling, etc., I have to look to donors who are volunteers in a large registry. It used to be called the National Marrow Donor Program. And this is, again, people like you and me who just volunteer to give stem cells to cure somebody. But the representation for Asians, African Americans, Hispanics, all of them is less than 30%. And so it becomes challenging to even treat these patients because you just don't have the representation in donors. Caucasians have always been leading in the number one group, an ethnic group in research studies, in treatments, and everything. And so there's a lot of education happening now where clinicians are becoming more aware of this. They're really trying to include more and more participants, reaching out, educating community doctors, going and giving public talks and trying to get other communities to participate to sort of have more diversity in medicine and what we do.
Towards that goal of medicine eventually becoming personalized. So you increase the sample size. Okay, last question as we close off. I want to, understand overall, are you optimistic about the future with, all these changes coming? And, you talked about all this advancement and hopefully the costs will go down and everyone will have access to a highly qualified doctor like you. And, if I'm suffering somewhere in rural India, I might be able to access you. Or with all the stem cell, research, etc., going on, is there a doomsday scenario? Another interview, I don't know where I read this, talked about how you could have, a country suddenly create a whole new race of people and suddenly have like a warrior class of, genetically, engineered humans and say, hey, they are like 12 feet tall and whatever. And like you suddenly have this army that no one can defeat, right? Because that's the advancement in medicine that could easily lead to, doctors creating a new race. So now, obviously both are a little bit far-fetched, but both could, if the research develops at the rate at which it is developing, both scenarios, as an outsider at least, seem fairly feasible. Are you optimistic, or is there a doomsday scenario in your mind, and is there a boom day scenario, and what are those two scenarios in your head?
I think as long as we have human beings controlling the regulatory aspects of all of this, we should be safe. And we should be safe from, the AI machines taking over, like the movies that we've all seen, Terminator and whatnot, right? Like, I mean, that's what it sort of sounds like. I mean, I think it's going to be a machine-operated world, but as long as the human beings allow themselves to be involved at the very core, I think that's what's going to save us. And I think I'm optimistic. I'm certainly optimistic about the future. I think there's so much. The only way to live is to advance, and that's a human evolution, and we all need to evolve in our minds and what we do in life with purpose. But the purpose should be in fostering harmony. The purpose should be in fostering balance, and the purpose, in my mind, is to bringing all minds together. And so anything that's discordant with that, I think then will be doomsday. So as long as we have good regulatory people and people that are good policymakers and good governments and good governance, I believe we have still a very optimistic future.
Okay, let's end on that note, and spoken like a true doctor on a very optimistic note. I always wanted my doctor to, whatever the situation was, make me at least feel optimistic. So thank you for that. Hoping your words ring true in the future. This was terrific, Pashna. Thank you so much. I have learned so much from you in the last 45 minutes, and I'm sure the people working with you, around you, the students you influence, would must treasure your knowledge and treasure your experience. So thank you for this absolutely gem of a conversation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's so much fun talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.